We have one team fighting to stay alive for bowl eligibility. We have one team fighting to compete for a Big 12 championship. Which team comes out on top? Well, I'm here with my special guest, Cole Manbeck, to talk about it. So, what's up, college sports fans, fellow members of Mountaineer Nation? This is Coos, and welcome in to another edition of Coos' Corner. Pull up a chair, sit back, relax, and let Cole and I serve you up a double shot of top shelf college football content as we preview the upcoming game between the Kansas State Wildcats and the West Virginia Mountaineers. How you doing, Cole?
I'm doing great, Coos. Thank you so much for having me on. John has spoke highly of you, a guy that we do the 3 Mile podcast with, a K-State show that we launched in March, and we usually produce about 3 shows a week, and I've had a great time doing it. And I'm glad to be able to jump on with you and talk a little more K-State football with West Virginia.
Absolutely, man. And for those of you who don't know, like he just said, he's on the 3 Mile podcast with John Kurtz and Derek Young. I've got his Twitter handle there on the screen at Cole_Manbeck. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see it there. And for the rest of you, hopefully you heard me. It's at Cole_Manbeck, Manbeck. You can find me on Twitter at Couz, at COUZ206 as well. This game between Kansas State and West Virginia will be played November 19th. We'll kick off at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central, and we'll air on Big 12 Now on ESPN Plus, and will be played in Morgantown at Milan Puskar Stadium. What I want to touch on first is we'll take a look at the odds here. The ESPN matchup predictor. Obviously, Kansas State's a favorite in this game pretty much all the way around. ESPN matchup predictor has K-State as a 71.7% chance to win. West Virginia at only a 28.3% chance to win. Obviously, with a 7-3 Kansas State team at ranked 19th in the country, coming in to face a 4-6 Mountaineers team who's has a lot of questions swirling around their program. That is to be expected. And then Vegas has Kansas State at -7.5 with the over-under on the game at 55. Cole, what are your thoughts on those odds? Do you think those are about right for this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think they seem about right. Look, I think the betting line started off around 5.5, and then it shot up to around 7.5 in the first 24 hours. And, the bottom line is, West Virginia has been pretty darn good at home. And, I'm sure the odds were somewhat close to that when Baylor came into Morgantown, and obviously West Virginia knocked them off. And I know OU was favored by 8 against the Mountaineers. And obviously we saw what happened on Saturday. And look, I know Kansas State's not taking this game for granted. I know I'm not taking it for granted. It's a tricky spot for K-State. I don't know if I'd call it a trap game, because at this point in the year, 2 games left, the way the Big 12's played out, no game can be a trap game for Kansas State. They got a Big 12 championship appearance on the line. And if they win out, they control their destiny. They're playing in Arlington against TCU in the Big 12 championship on December 4th. So I'm sure Kansas State's going to come into this locked in, but it's also a spot. K-State hasn't won in Morgantown since 2014. They've lost their last 3 trips there. Couple really good games, and then the COVID game in 2020, K-State played really poorly. But and actually, I think in the 2018 game, West Virginia blew K-State out. So, when I look at the odds, I expect this to be probably a 7-point game. I mean, I also watched West Virginia against TCU, caught up on that, watched a little bit of a replay of it, and it's a 3-point game, as you guys know, with less than a minute left. We know how good TCU is. So I'm definitely not taking this for granted, and I think the odds seem right around the right spot.
I agree. I think so too. I mean, West Virginia, like you said, they do play well at home. They're like Jekyll and Hyde, totally different teams on the road versus at home. And so I do expect the Mountaineers to compete in this game, and show up. They've shown that they are not giving up on each other, not giving up on Coach Brown, despite the negativity surrounding the program. Even the games we've lost, with the exception of maybe Texas Tech, the effort has always been there. They've just played bad at times, really poorly at times. So, I do think they'll show up. It's senior day too, so they're going to want to get a win for their seniors. So I do think West Virginia will bring the effort. I think they'll bring their A game, so to speak. Will it be enough? It's hard to tell. We'll do our score predictions at the end, so I'm not going to give that up. But yeah, I'm looking forward to a good game. I think it'll be close. I really do. I think it'll be a good competitive game, which the way this Big 12 season has went, man, I think that's kind of par for the course,
Yeah, definitely. It's been so unpredictable in Big 12 play. I mean, every time you think you got a finger on the pulse of what's going to happen, something new transpires that catches you off guard. For example, I thought TCU was going to lose by double digits to Texas last week, and look what Texas looked like. I mean, Texas was a team that came into Manhattan in that first half just 2 weeks ago and was lights out, probably the best half that they played since Alabama this year. And then they get a home bid against TCU with a chance to control their own destiny, the Longhorns, that is. And they lose that game and couldn't even muster an offensive touchdown. That's an offense that came into Manhattan and had 31 points in the first half. And now over their last 6 quarters, they've scored one. Actually, they don't have a single offensive touchdown over the last 6 quarters. There's so much talent on that Texas team. So I just use that as an example that this thing is so up and down. I mean, Kansas State comes off a 38-28 loss to TCU, then beats Oklahoma State 48-0 in Manhattan, an Oklahoma State team that was coming off a win over Texas. And then K-State loses the game against the Longhorns, and then they come out and completely dominate Baylor 31-3. And so, it's just impossible to predict week in and week out what's going to happen in this league. I've heard different podcasts, actually national podcasts, say it's probably the most fun league in the country, just because that unpredictability factor, that you never know what's going to happen each week. Every game is interesting. And so, I'm excited to see what happens this Saturday. Obviously, from a K-State perspective, nervous about it because, K-State's got a lot on the line, and West Virginia could ruin that.
Yeah. Well, and I heard a stat today that I didn't realize, speaking of the Big 12. During Coach Brown's press conference, one of the media members brought this up. But it's possible, it's not likely, but possible that all 10 teams in the Big 12 can make a bowl game.
Yeah.
Because West Virginia has 2 games. If West Virginia and Iowa State both win out, they'll both be 6-6. They could make a bowl game. And the other 8 teams, I think, Texas only needs one more win, I think. Anyway, there's a few other teams that only need one, or Oklahoma, I'm sorry. Oklahoma only needs one more win. Texas is already bowl eligible. Kansas is bowl eligible. So, I look for Oklahoma to probably get that one win, but at the end of the day, you got a league where top to bottom, you could potentially have the worst team in the league at 6-6, which is pretty remarkable, actually.
Well, and you could argue that Iowa State maybe is the worst team in the league, but they have the best defense in this league. And so they've got a great defense. Their offense has been coming on a little better of late as well, but they're sitting there with one Big 12 win. I mean, the bottom line is KU has really lifted the floor of this league this year with them coming up with Lance Leipold and how well they played. And so there's no gimmies in this league. I mean, you look at what, K-State had to scratch out a 10-9 victory in Ames. Oklahoma State had to scratch out a 6-point victory at home against Iowa State this last weekend. And West Virginia, TCU, that game we talked about earlier, 3-point game with less than 40 seconds left. And West Virginia team that beat Baylor before Baylor went on a run of playing really good football. So there's no gimmies. And of course, I watched the West Virginia Pitt game, which was great to see that back being played, the backyard brawl. And obviously West Virginia should have won that game, not to bring up bad memories for West Virginia fans, but there's talent on West Virginia's team. It's a deep league, and it makes it a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. All right, let's get into team stats here real quick. I want to share these with the listener, the viewers, those who are watching on YouTube. Can read along with us, and I will read them out for those who are listening on podcast platforms. But when you look at the team stats here, you've got Kansas State 30.6 points a game, West Virginia 31.4, so pretty even there. Points allowed per game, K-State 17.5 points a game allowed, which is 12th in the country, according to the NCAA stats. West Virginia is giving up 32.8, so that's not good. Total yards, Kansas State 417.8 a game. West Virginia, 409.2. Yards passing, K-State, 203.1. West Virginia, 243.7. Yards rushing, K-State, 214.7. West Virginia, 165.5. Yards allowed, and of course, that 214, we all know a lot of that's Deuce Vaughn. Of course, Adrian Martinez has probably played a role in that too. But yards allowed, you've got K-State at 361.1. West Virginia, 415. Once again, that's not good either. Passing yards allowed, K-State 217.3, West Virginia 268. Rushing yards allowed, K-State 143.8, West Virginia 147.2. Cole, what stands out to me with those stats, man, is K-State's balance. I mean, obviously they do really good in not giving up a lot of points, but they're just a balanced team. What do you can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. And they become much more balanced over the last few weeks, right? There was a part in this season where they were not very balanced early on in the year when Adrian Martinez was running the ball a lot and they weren't taking a lot of shots downfield. Like if you look at the South Dakota game to start the season, K-State only threw for 53 yards in that game, 11 of 15 for 53 yards. So a very low yards per completion, yards per pass attempt rate. The Tulane game, the loss that shocked everyone, but everyone now knows that the Green Wave are a pretty good team, obviously a top 25 team. K-State threw for around 120 yards in that game. But as the season has gone on, they've gotten much more explosive in the passing game, and that's a credit. Adrian Martinez had a great game against Oklahoma, running and throwing the football, and from there it kind of took off. And now they've gotten to another level with Will Howard playing quarterback. They've become a much more balanced team, to your point, where it almost looks like not having Adrian Martinez out there and the threat of his running ability has actually opened up the running game more for Deuce Vaughn, because they're taking more shots downfield. They're throwing the ball more. You look at just the Baylor game, for example, K-State threw the ball 35 times. That's quite a bit for a K-State offense traditionally. Against Oklahoma State, they threw it 37 times. And, in those games, they put up 48 and 31 respectively. And Deuce Vaughn went over 100 yards in both of those games. Obviously, I feel bad often because we as K-State don't talk about Deuce Vaughn enough. We just kind of take him for granted, right? Because he's such a humble kid. I mean, he's an amazing kid. Just great humility, great teammate, but obviously a tremendous talent, a physical runner. What makes him so special is, obviously he's got great feet and makes great cuts and reads, but he's a power running back. I mean, he's 5'5", but he will drag defenders for 5 yards, and so he's a special talent, both in the receiving game and the running game. And it has helped lead to that balance. With Will Howard playing quarterback, they're throwing the ball. They're averaging 8.5 yards per pass, over 13 per completion. And then, they're running the ball for nearly 190 with Will Howard in there. So I don't think any of us saw it. Will Howard, I was talking to you, Kuz, off air. He's from Pennsylvania, so he's coming back home. He played in Morgantown in 2020 in the COVID season when he was forced to play 7 games because Skylar Thompson got injured, and he was a true freshman that year. And, Howard kind of just got overexposed early on in his career when he wasn't ready. He was forced to play out of necessity. He's a big kid. He's a talented kid, and the light bulb has come on this year. This is his 3rd year of college football, and the offense looks different. And as a result, to what we talked about, they've been very balanced over the last few weeks.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Coach Brown has not taken it for granted, because they asked him about Deuce Vaughn today in his press conference, and he couldn't have said more glowing things. He talked about his lower body strength, how good he was at breaking tackles, how good the team was at moving him around and using him at different spots, how good of a route runner he was. He glowed about. He said there's, he listed Marshall Faulk and a couple of other legends and how good they were in their route running, and he put Deuce Vaughn in that category. He wouldn't go as far as to compare him to Barry Sanders. He said I'm not putting that on anybody, but he said he made a move in last year's game against us where he did a spin move, and he said he almost sat down. He got so low he almost sat down, spun, and then popped back up and ran the ball, ran for yards. And he said Barry Sanders is the only other running back I've ever seen do anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think maybe you guys do. I'm not, obviously I don't know if you guys take it for granted or not, but I know nationally, I don't think at least Big 12 fans, speaking for myself anyway, I know how good the guy is, and he scares me to death. And I look back I remember the days of Darren Sproles at K-State, and I think Deuce Vaughn may be even better as far as a pure running back.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly K-State's been blessed to have some smaller running backs that have been very talented, right? And oftentimes whenever they have one, the comparison often is to Darren Sproles, and in this situation, I think it's close actually. He's such a talented kid, and when I say take him for granted, it's obviously we know how darn talented he is, but I feel like sometimes when we do our 3 Mall podcast, for example, Deuce runs for 100 yards and we don't hardly talk about it because it's just it's just what he does. And from a route running perspective, against Texas, they got him over the middle of the field numerous times. He made some moves running routes over the middle that were incredible without the ball there. He had 7 catches for 86 yards against Texas. And then against Baylor, he had, I think, 7 or 8 catches for 50 yards, including a touchdown as well. So early on in the year, and I'll be curious what West Virginia does defensively against him. What we noticed early on in the year is a lot of teams were keying in on Deuce in the passing game. They didn't want him to be the guy to beat him out in the flats, out over the middle of the field. And so they were doubling up on him sometimes and having a spy on him. And the last couple of games, K-State looks like they found some ways to get him open. Maybe it's just different ways the defenses are playing Deuce and trying to take things away. But he's been effective in the passing game the last couple of weeks. He's a talented kid. He's got over 100 catches in his career, and this is just his 3rd year of football. And he's gone over 3,000 yards rushing in his career. He's actually number 2 now on K-State's all-time rushing charts, behind only Darren Sproles in terms of overall rushing yards, which is a pretty incredible feat. Now, he's not going to probably ever catch Sproles unless he comes back. If he comes back for a 4th year, which a lot of people around Manhattan think he's probably just going to go ahead and go pro because he's not going to get any bigger. His draft stock's not going to get any better. There's only so many hits, as Kuz, that a running back can take. Yep. So I think the general expectation is he'll probably go pro. But it's a pretty incredible feat that he's done what he's done when you factor in this is only his 3rd year, and that first year was his true freshman year, and it was a COVID season, so he only played 10 games. So he's special kid.
He is. Yeah, you're right. I guess you could say you guys are a little bit spoiled as far as he's concerned from the running back perspective. When you have somebody like that performs consistently week in, week out, kind of like I'd say Texas is probably kind of like that with Bijan Robinson. I would imagine too. It's like a week under 100 yards for them would be bad.
Yeah, I mean, Texas just doesn't. K-State never does not give the ball to Deuce enough. Texas' biggest problem, as is I think Bijan had 12 carries against TCU. And
it's baffling to me.
It's bizarre how they handle it. Not to get off topic with Texas, but I've seen games where they're averaging 8 yards a carry, and then they're dropping Quinn Ewers back and throwing it 50 times plus. Still, that Oklahoma State game comes to mind where both Roschon Johnson and Bijan were averaging egregious numbers. Not egregious in a bad way, but just phenomenal numbers. And the Sarkisian didn't stick with the run. So K-State is very spoiled to have a guy like Deuce for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of Deuce, let's talk about the stats real quick. His stats, and then the other key skill position guys in this game. Obviously, leading quarterbacks, which the leading passer for Kansas State is Adrian Martinez, but he's obviously not going to be playing in this game. But he's 118 out of 182, 1,261 yards, 6 touchdowns, and an interception. JT Daniels for West Virginia, which Neil Brown has not indicated whether he's going to start or whether it will be Garrett Green. But Daniels is 200 out of 327 for 2,107 yards, 13 touchdowns to 9 picks. But like you and I were talking off air, Cole, he's been struggling the last 3-4 weeks. Really, he's really been regressing for whatever reason. I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if it's he's losing confidence. Something's going on with him. He's just not the same quarterback he was in the beginning of the season. It wouldn't surprise me to see Garrett Green start this game, but at the same time, Coach Brown is extremely loyal to his guys. So I also wouldn't be surprised if he runs JT Daniels out there for the first series either. Nothing surprises me at this point. But I wanted to make sure we talked about Will Howard's stats here. So I'm pulling them up as we're talking, but because I don't think it would be fair to not talk about his stats, since he's probably going to be the starting quarterback in this game.
Yep.
But he's 53 out of 84, 717 yards, 63.1% completion percentage, 8.5 yards per completion, 9 touchdowns, only 1 pick. And he's not been sacked yet. That's weird.
Yeah.
That's good. I mean, that means he's getting rid of the football, in my opinion.
It's a big thing. 84 pass attempts and not sacked once. Yeah. He's a really smart, cerebral kid that he had Ivy League offers from pretty much every Ivy League school being up in Pennsylvania. He had Power 5 offers too, but
Right.
He's a very smart kid, and he's played enough football now. And I think he's very good at picking up and reading where blitzes are coming from and knowing when to get rid of the football, and where to look and where to put his eyes. That's something that's really stood out to me. Adrian Martinez, for much of the year, he's eluded some sacks with just his escapability and athleticism, but it's different with Will Howard. It's more of a quick in rhythm decision. He makes quicker reads than Adrian does. And that's not a knock on Adrian. They're just different styles of quarterbacks. And so, he's been really good, really efficient. He's played basically 11 quarters now in the last 4 weeks. He didn't play against Texas. A lot of K-State fans were critical of that decision to play Adrian Martinez. He'd been banged up, missed. Adrian went out of the TCU game after the first series, and that was when Will Howard first set foot on the field this entire season. They were planning to redshirt Will Howard still because he's never gotten the opportunity to use that redshirt season. If you look back, he was supposed to redshirt last year, and Skylar Thompson got hurt again in the Baylor game, the next to the last game of the year. Well, Will Howard had played 4 games at that point. He was going to redshirt. He was very unselfish, and they went into that season-ending game without Skylar at quarterback, and Will Howard was willing to give up his redshirt just to play in that one game. That was his 5th game. He did not play well, but K-State, I think, felt like, and Will Howard, he wants to play full seasons of football as a starting quarterback. They felt like, okay, we need to get that back to him. With Adrian Martinez here, a veteran quarterback they brought in to start the whole year. But now they're at the point where this will be Will Howard's 4th game, and that red shirt's going to come off again for him. The one saving grace for Will Howard is he's got the COVID season. So even if he doesn't redshirt, he still has 2 years after this.
Okay,
and
that's good.
The way he looks right now, when you look at his size and stature, he's over 6'4", he's 230 pounds. If he keeps developing the way he is, he probably won't need that red shirt year and, maybe playing professionally down the road if he develops the way they think. So, I think 2 more years as a starting quarterback in college level would probably be enough for him if he continues to develop the way it's looking like. And I'm glad you brought up the sack thing, though, because that's such a big deal. And, it's just a remarkable efficiency. What I'll say is, so when he has been in the game, they have scored 13 touchdowns on his 21 drives this year. He's averaging, the K-State offense is averaging 4.5 points per drive with Will Howard in at quarterback. If you look, and this is a small sample size, I know, but if you look at the leaders in college football in points per drive as an overall offense, Oregon entered last weekend leading the country in points per drive at 4.1 points per drive as a team. Will Howard in his 21 drives is at 4.5 points per drive.
Wow.
And so I only point that out. I know it's a small sample size. It's not done over the course of the season, but just to show how good he has been in his small amount of time he's been on the field so far.
Wow. That is great. I mean, you're talking about efficiency. That's the definition of efficiency.
Yep.
And then I want to touch on, since Garrett Green's going to play in this game for the Mountaineers. I don't know if he'll start, but Coach Brown did say today that Garrett has earned more playing time. Whether he won't release who his starter is because he's trying to. I guess it's a strategic thing, but Garrett Green is 20 out of 37 for 241 yards. And most of that obviously came in last week's game because he played the whole second half and then 2 drives in the first half. But he's averaging 6.5 yards per completion, 2 touchdowns, no picks, has not been sacked. But running the ball, he's ran the ball 27 times for 212 yards, which is 7.9 yards per carry, with 3 touchdowns. And he had two rushing touchdowns in last week's game. And that's the difference. You talked about Will Howard and Adrian Martinez. We have the same situation, 2 completely different quarterbacks. JT Daniels is a pocket passer. He's going to stand back and try to pick you apart, whereas Garrett Green is going to tuck it and run if he has to, right? Sometimes he even tucks it and runs too. Sometimes he does it before he should, to be honest, because Coach Brown gets frustrated at him for it. But the thing is, he's so good at it, sometimes it works. As a matter of fact, most of the time it works. So I figured, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Garrett Green's stats well, because he will be a factor in this game. I mean, heck, he was Big 12 Player of the Week last week, so I think he deserves a mention. And he led the Mountaineers to that victory over Oklahoma. And I think he's fun to watch. He plays with a lot of energy. I think even Kansas State fans will enjoy watching this young man play. because he's just a college football player, man. But rushing yards, Deuce Vaughn, 198 carries, 1,081 yards, 5 touchdowns. I think I saw he's like 17th in the country or something in rushing yards this year. Tony Mathis is 122 carries, 545 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He's our leading rusher. Our second leading rusher, C.J. Donaldson, is out for the rest of the season with an injury. But back to Deuce Vaughn real quick. We talked about his route running earlier. His receiving numbers are pretty impressive as well as a running back. And I'll touch on those real quick too. But he's caught 38 passes for 266 yards and 3 touchdowns. So, I mean, he can hurt you just as much in the air as he can on the ground. That's what makes him such a dangerous player. And then Malik Knowles, receiver for Kansas State, 38 catches, 558 yards, a touchdown. Very dangerous guy. And then Bryce Ford Wheaton for West Virginia, 58 catches, 641 yards, 7 touchdowns. So that's the 2 leading receivers for these 2 squads. Are there any players, Cole, that may not be listed or that we haven't talked about yet that you think deserve a mention on the offensive side for Kansas State?
Yeah, and Malik Knowles, you mentioned him as a leading receiver, so he's a guy that has really started to flash this year. He, as a West Virginia fan and Big 12 fan, you probably heard his name for a long time. This is his 5th year of playing in this league at Kansas State, and K-State fans have always waited kind of for him to blossom because he's got a lot of athleticism. He's a bigger receiver. He's fast. He's one of the best kick returners in the country, and I think his career high coming into this year in receiving yards was around 450. He's surpassed everything, all of his career highs in receptions. He's a big play guy, and they're getting the ball to him more over the last. He didn't have a great game. He got banged up at the end of the Texas game, so he wasn't in the last couple series. And then I think that kind of lingered against Baylor. He only had 3 catches for 18 yards against the Bears, but the previous 3 games before that, he had I think 17 catches for 291 yards in those previous 3 games. So
wow.
He's a guy that's really come on, and that's been kind of consistent with Will Howard being in a quarterback. Phillip Brooks is a smaller receiver, but he's done some nice things. And I think a guy just to put on your guys' radar is a guy that's coming on. He's a sophomore, and he's a fullback hybrid type player, kind of tight end, fullback. He plays both. Ben Sennett, and he's around 6'4", 240 pounds, and he had 90 yards and I think 7 catches against Baylor. And against OU earlier this year, he had 4 catches for 80 yards. Yeah, he's a blossoming, talented player. And, K-State wants to use their tight ends in this system, and he's starting to really come on. And so that's a guy to probably look out for as well. And then, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the offensive line. Cooper Beebe, K-State's left guard. He was an all Big 12 left tackle the prior season. He's an All-American type offensive lineman,
right?
And he's very versatile. He made first team All Big 12 at left tackle. I think his NFL future is at guard on the interior, but that just shows how good he could be, that he could bounce around and still be so effective. So,
yeah.
If you're into watching offensive linemen, Cooper Beebe is a guy to watch. He's just a terrific player up front for K-State.
Yeah, I've heard that name a lot as far as a lot of preseason watch lists and things like that. But for West Virginia, I just touch on a couple of their key guys that I haven't mentioned. Wide receivers Sam James and Caden Prather are both big contributors. Sam James is actually this is his 4th year in the program. Well, 5th year in the program, but 4th year playing in the program. He's redshirted his first year, but 41 catches, 624 yards, 15.2 average, 3 touchdowns on the year, and he's just been. He's dropped. He's had a lot of drops. He's especially the first couple years of his career, he struggled with drops. But he's doing a lot better now than he was in the past. He's kind of corrected that issue for the most part. He has his moments at times, but he's still catching the ball a lot more consistently than he did in the past. But he's going to go down as one of, statistically, probably a top 5 or 10 receiver all time at West Virginia. And he's kind of done it under the radar. You don't hear his name. Everybody talks about Bryce Ford Wheaton because of the year he's having. But Sam James has kind of always consistently been that guy, that just makes plays when you need him to. And then Caden Prather's a sophomore, 50 catches, 187 yards, 3 touchdowns as well. And then you mentioned offensive lineman. We've got a stud center of our own named Zach Frazier, who's, probably going to be first or second team, all Big 12, I would imagine. Maybe even, I don't know if he'll be All-American, but I'd say he'll be in the conversation. He was a freshman All-American 2 years ago. And then Wyatt Milam, our left tackle, was a freshman All-American last year. He's only a sophomore now, but he's really developing, and both of those guys will probably be playing on Sundays in the future. I just hope Zach Frazier comes back for his senior year because we're going to need that guy because he's really a leader on that offensive line and the quarterback of that line up there for us. And just does a really good job communicating the blocking scheme and everything, and communicating with JT Daniels and the quarterbacks and what needs to be done to get the guys in the right place and run the right plays. But defensively, obviously, we know about Felix Anudike-Uzomah. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I usually screw that up. Obviously he's the beast, always has been. What kind of season is he having right now?
You know, he's such an impressive guy. You know, this is only his third year too, and he was actually going to go to Missouri as just a student before K-State offered him a scholarship. And,
wow.
You know, then at one point he committed to North Dakota State, didn't have any FBS scholarship offers. And K-State came in and offered him, and he's really he blew up last year and was phenomenal. And he's got 7.5 sacks this year. But he hasn't had a sack in the last 3 games, I think. Maybe the last 2 games he hasn't had a sack. Look, I've been impressed with him because he's faced a lot of double teams. Right. He commands so much attention, especially coming off the year that he had. And even though teams double him, he still finds ways to beat it. I'll say he also is probably one of the most held players in college football, and it doesn't get called. I don't know how. There's just some egregious holds that are missed on him. And I know holding happens a lot, but, you know,
we deal with that. We deal with that with Dante Steels too, man. It's terrible.
Yeah. But anyway, officials just – yeah, no, you're right. You know, Sills is obviously a heck of a player too, and you know, so Felix is having a very fine season still. When you factor in just all the attention that he commands, and he's been really good as usual. So it'll be interesting to watch that K-State D line against a talented West Virginia O line. You mentioned the center. Look, he's going to be going up against Eli Huggins, which is, you know, arguably the best nose tackle in this league. And so, you know, K-State runs a 3-3-5 defense. And so, you know, you're going to have Huggins at center and then Felix on the edge. I don't know if he'll line up over the left tackle or right. They move him around some. But, yeah, that's going to be fun to watch.
It will be a good matchup.
Yeah.
For you guys who like watching the big uglies up front, that'll be a matchup to watch right there. But yeah, for us, Dante Steele's obviously same thing, taking on all double teams. By the time he leaves, he's going to be one of the top 5 in sacks. He leads in sack yards, leads in tackles for loss yards and tackles for loss in his career. So, and he's going to be in the top 5 in sacks, overall sacks. So, just a phenomenal career for Dante Steels. Decided to come back for his 5th year. I hate that he's not having a better year because he deserves it. He's just a hard worker. He stayed through all the turmoil, the coaching changes, and everything he's went through. He's been loyal to West Virginia through all that, you know. So, you know, he's obviously going to be one to watch. And then, really key for our our linebacker position and defensive secondary has just struggled all year in coverage. And you know, we've got a lot of transfers at those positions, and because we lost so many guys to the portal, and they have struggled to adapt, in my opinion, to this defense. Now they have done better the last couple of weeks. We've got some guys that are starting to finally come on, looks like it's finally starting to click for them. A little late in the year, but it is, I guess, better late than never. But so, you know, I'll keep an eye. I don't know if Charles Woods will be back. He's our star corner. I don't know if he'll be back. They didn't ask Brown about him today in the press conference. He's been out with an injury. It wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't come back because I think he's only played 4 games. So they might, and you know, if he wants to come back another year, they may just redshirt him the rest of the way and you know, keep his eligibility for next year because we're probably going to need those DBs, you know, him at that DB spot again next year. But yeah, just keep an eye on our DBs, see how they play, if they've improved in coverage at all. And then the linebacker spot, Lee Koba is probably our best linebacker at the Mike position, middle linebacker position. But that's really the key. But our defensive front is really where it's at with us, with Dante Steels, Jordan Jefferson, our nose tackle, and then Sean Martin and Taj Austin as our defensive ends. Those guys kind of rotate, but that's really the star of our team is our defensive front.
Yeah, I noticed when I looked at the kind of defensive efficiency numbers of the secondary, it looked like kind of a weak point for West Virginia on the season of where they've maybe struggled the most. And, where K-State with Will Howard under center and the shotgun, wherever he is lined up as, they'll be a little more likely to be able to exploit that.
Yeah.
I do know I saw Eric Gray, run for over 200 yards. Look, he did that to K-State when K-State played in Norman. He ran for over 100 easily. He's a really good running back, so it'll be interesting to watch, how they defend Deuce Vaughn, what they can hold him to, versus what they do against K-State in the pass. I'll tell you, one of the biggest keys for K-State this year has just been able to take care of the football. And, K-State's turned the ball over 7 times all year. And that's really been a staple of Chris Kleiman for the most part in his career. Skylar Thompson, I think during his time under the Chris Kleiman era, or in the Chris Kleiman era, maybe had 7 or 8 interceptions total, and over 20 starts. They've done a good job of taking care of the football, and K-State's defense has forced 18 turnovers on the year. K-State's tied for 7th in the country and tops in the Big 12 in turnover margin heading into this game. And I know West Virginia, that's kind of been a problem point for them, as I think they're 117th in turnover margin with only 8 forced and 15 turnovers offensively. So that's going to be a key part. Now, what I will tell you is, for whatever reason, last weekend at Baylor was the very first time K-State forced a turnover on the road. They had not forced any turnovers on the road. They got 2 last weekend, but prior to that, the first 16 turnovers forced were all in home games for K-State. And this is K-State's 5th road game heading into Morgantown this year. So for whatever reason, they've been able to turn people over on the road very much. And K-State's going to be down their one of their star safeties, Kobe Savage, who was unfortunately lost for the season with a knee injury in Waco on Saturday. So they're going to have to adjust, because safeties are such a key staple of this defense for Chris Kleiman and Joe Klanderman, the D coordinator, because they play 3 safeties at a time. And they're going to be down one of the guys. He's their second leading tackler. He leads the team with 3 interceptions. He's not going to be available for the rest of the year. So they're going to have to adjust and probably play a younger guy out there some.
Yeah. Well, that maybe, hopefully that's an area that West Virginia will be able to exploit. A lot of that may depend on where, with Garrett Green in the game, we're going to be more of a run first offense for sure. We had kind of been leaning that way anyway, even with JT in the game, because our running backs had really been performing pretty well this year. We've been pretty balanced with Mathis and Donaldson. But which I look for Green to get most of the playing time. Honestly, I think he earned it last week. And I think it's going to be hard for Coach Brown to not put him in after the way he played, especially with him being on the hot seat anyway. That's, he's probably, he needs to win, do everything he can to save his job. So if it's even possible at this point. Yeah, and just think, you guys almost had him as your coach.
That's an interesting point, just because I was a Neil Brown fan and was making a push for him to potentially be the coach over Chris Kleiman. And I know there was some going back and forth at K-State over what decision to make there. Neil Brown did a heck of a job at Troy, and I've been surprised how much he struggled in Morgantown, to be honest.
I'll be honest with you. We thought it was a home run hire. I think everybody in the country thought it was a home run hire.
Yeah. Well, you just never know with these things, right? I thought it was a great hire. I'm sure Nebraska thought Scott Frost was a great hire. It sure seemed like it. And Fred Hoiberg on the basketball side for them. And it's been a complete disaster on both fronts for Nebraska. So sometimes you think that, and it just doesn't work out the way that you envisioned it, or what it looks like on paper. And it's, when you look at Green, I'm trying to think if K-State has really faced Spencer Sanders is mobile. And K-State obviously really bottled him up, but he's been banged up, and I'm not sure how much he was really looking to run or get out of the pocket anyways when K-State played him. I'm trying to think through the Big 12. Donovan Smith played against K-State for Texas Tech. He tried to run some, but they haven't faced a ton of dual threat type guys, so I'll be interested how they match up there. I think a fun matchup will honestly be, and this will be partially dependent if Daniels goes, but K-State has 2 probably all Big 12 corners. Julius Brents, definitely. He's probably a first-team all Big 12 corner, and if you haven't seen him, he's one of the biggest corners you'll ever see. He's almost 6'4". Just got an incredible wingspan. You think of long corners like that tall, usually their hips, their mobility, their ability to flip and turn isn't going to be as great, but he is. And he's a big-time hitter. He's a great tackler. he's a big force to be reckoned with. So it'd be interesting to watch him, whoever he's covering, Bryce Ford Wheaton, a bigger receiver as well. Those two would be a fun matchup. And then Echo Boydo is a veteran corner for K-State that's really having a nice year, really has had a nice career. Another senior opposite of Brent's. So they got two talented corners as well. The defense has been good. When you look at the numbers, K-State's holding teams to 1.7 points per drive. It's actually, if you go to Brian Freemau's site, he tracks all those points per drive metrics, the efficiency metrics. And he goes back to 2007 in his data. The 1.7 points per drive K-State's allowing would be the fewest by a K-State defense since he started tracking it over the last 15 years, which is saying something because K-State had some pretty good defenses, especially 2012, 2013, right. With Arthur Brown and some of those guys. So they've been really good on the defensive side of football. Kleiman's a defensive guy, so it's not surprising. But Joe Klanderman, in his second year as a D coordinator, has been a really nice job.
Yeah. What do they move their corners around, or do they pretty much keep them on the same?
Yeah, no, that's a good question to bring up. They don't do a lot of matching them up, so they're gonna keep them on the same side of the field a lot. So if West Virginia wants to move their receivers around, they can probably try to get a mismatch at some point. Although K-State's been pretty good across the board at the defensive secondary, especially Josh Hayes is another guy that he can play. He plays safety for K-State, but he also can match up and play corner and line up in the nickel. He's a very versatile guy. He's one of K-State's most valuable defenders. He added him in the transfer portal this year. He had 1 year left. He actually played for Kleiman at North Dakota State. That's how long he's been playing college football. So this is his sixth year of playing. So yeah, it's a good K-State defense, but we know West Virginia's offense is talented, and they could put up some numbers. They did that against a Baylor defense, as you guys know.
We did, but we were aided a little bit by a couple turnovers.
That's true.
But one of the few games this year we got multiple turnovers in, and then when you talk about your corners, to me that matchup is key there because, and this will kind of segue right into our keys to victory here for West Virginia. A key to victory for me is if your corners are that good. Our receivers, for all the things they do well, they sometimes struggle to get separation, and if they're not able to get separation against your corners, it could be a long day. And that might be, when somebody like a Garrett Green may have to step up, and we might have to rely on his feet to make plays to open up the passing game a little even more, so to speak. So that's a concern for me. So I think our receivers getting separation could be a key for us, and then obviously how good we can block up front. That's always a key. And then I think we're going to have to run the ball well. Our offense, when we have to drop back and pass the ball 30, 40 times, we're just not very good. So we've got to be able to run the football, get at least 100 yards on the ground. To be honest, we really need about 200. Our offense this year, the games we've been able to run for 200 yards, we've won basically. And when we haven't, we don't because our passing game just hasn't been consistent. So I think key for victory for us is running the football well. Our receivers getting separation on your corners, and obviously up front and defensively, we got to force some turnovers, man. Because I'm afraid if we don't, I don't know that we'll be able to get you guys off the field. To be honest, because of the Deuce Vaughn factor, the Malik Knowles factor, and the way Will Howard's playing, and the way our secondary has been struggling, I think we're going to have to force a couple turnovers to steal a couple possessions from you guys, and to try to keep this game close, and hopefully try to pull one out late if we have a chance. That's what I think we need to do to win the game.
Yeah, look, because I would agree. I would echo a lot of what you said. I would pinpoint turnovers as being one of the biggest things in this game, just because of what I mentioned earlier, in terms of turnover margin and looking at what K-State's defense has been able to do this year and forcing turnovers and K-State taking care of the football. K-State's going on the road. It looks like the weather conditions will be okay, just cold. Is that right?
It'll be cold. It's been in the 30s here all week, so.
Same here.
I haven't looked ahead to Saturday yet, but if it's anything like it's been so far this week, it's going to be a cold day.
But not the rain and everything. It didn't look like, at least last I checked, that you guys had to deal with in Morgantown last weekend against OU, right? So, I think turnovers are going to be a big factor in this game. And look, if West Virginia can win the turnover margin, that's going to be key. I'm trying to think if K-State, has lost the turnover margin this year in a game. I'm just looking. They have lost it a couple times, but it was like by one turnover. And running the football, it's an interesting point because I mentioned earlier they faced a lot of dual threat guys, but as I look, Oklahoma ran for 220 against K-State and averaged 6.5 yards per carry.
Mm-hmm.
TCU ran for 215, but it was on 56 carries, so it was 3.8 yards per rush. But Kendre Miller really got them pretty good. A lot of the losses on those yards were on Max Duggan sacks. Kendre Miller, I think, was averaging 4 yards after contact against K-State. And then Texas obviously killed K-State with its running ability with Bijan Robinson. They ran for 270 and 6.7 per carry. K-State also has bottled a lot of teams up. Like Baylor couldn't really get the running game going against K-State, and we know how much they love to run the ball. That was a Baylor team that had averaged 262 yards on the ground in the previous 3 games, which was top 5 in the country over that time. And against K-State, they ran for 103. So it's hard to predict, but I will say, like, I know Donaldson was a big part of that offense, an extremely talented kid. But from what I've watched of Tony Mathis Jr., I think he's a talented kid too. I mean, I watched him against Baylor. I thought he was very effective, and if you play Green at quarterback, that's 2 running threats that K-State will have to defend, and that'll be challenging because they haven't faced, like I said, a ton of dual threat type QBs this year. So it'll be a different adjustment. And I would say one of the biggest keys to this game also is just how K-State starts the game. And if they start off well early, I could see them take that West Virginia crowd out of the game. And you could speak better to this than me. I don't know what the fan, the feelings in the fan base are, how big of a crowd it'll be, how amped it'll be. But, I think if K-State can jump out to a 2-score lead early on, it'll make it challenging for West Virginia. I'll be curious, what that does to the atmosphere there.
Yeah, I expect there'll probably be about 50,000 fans there, ballpark. Maybe with the cold, it might be between 45 and 50,000 fans. Last week there was around 50, but I think it's going to be even colder this Saturday than it was last Saturday. So probably around 45,000 if I had to guess, maybe up to 50 because it is senior day. There'll probably be some extra family members there.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean it's weather. I don't know if it'll be a factor really because you guys are probably accustomed to playing in cold weather as well. But the fans, the fans that'll be there will be loud. But there's probably won't be as many as what we normally have in a game like this because of the fan sentiment right now. The apathy is beginning to set in a little bit amongst the fan base because of the coaching situation and the 4-6 record. So there is some of that there that will impact it, but it'll be a loud crowd. West Virginia's crowds are always loud and always into the game, regardless. So that is a great point. If you guys can start fast and keep the crowd out of the game, it will definitely go into your all's favor, the Kansas State favor.
Well, and I mentioned that also because, K-State started fast against Baylor, started fast against Oklahoma State and dominated those games. They started slow against Texas, and it kind of took K-State's crowd out of the game.
Yeah.
And what was going to be an amped up atmosphere at night. I mean, they were still loud, but, things kind of snowballed in K-State in that game. And, obviously another huge key will be the running game. K-State is going to have to run the football too. Like I think West Virginia, a key will be for them to try and hold K-State under 200 yards on the ground. And, I think K-State ran for against Baylor, they ran for 184. Against Texas, they ran for 139. That's a really good Texas defense, though. And then Oklahoma State, they ran for 199. So, K-State hasn't gone over 200 actually in the last 5 games. Texas Tech, they ran for 343, and then at OU they ran for 275. But that was when Adrian Martinez was playing QB, and he had several explosives in the running game along with Deuce. So, yeah, K-State is probably going to they've been much more balanced throwing the ball, but I still think they're going to try to line up and run Deuce probably 25 times in this game and hope he can pop a couple big ones. And so they're going to rely on that offensive line. It'll be curious to watch that offensive line against a talented defensive front for West Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. That will be a key matchup in this game for sure. Real quick, we touched on the keys of victory. Cole, what would be your score prediction for this game?
Yeah, look, I'm I'm nervous for this game. I don't know what to expect from either team necessarily. K-State's got a lot to play for, and I don't know. I don't know if they'll come out uptight at all, knowing they control their own destiny with 2 games remaining. They got their rivalry game against Kansas the following week at primetime, 7:00 kick on Big Fox. But I think ultimately K-State will come in locked in and will play a good football game. I still think it's going to be a competitive game. It's going to be a tight game throughout. I'm going to take K-State 31, West Virginia 23. So really right around that 7.5 point spread mark. That would be K-State barely covering. So if you got money on it, that would be one to sweat out. But that right now is where I sit with it. But like I said, this season has been, like we talked about earlier, it's been so unpredictable in the Big 12, and I could see any outcome occur in this game. And so it's going to be one that I'm going to be pretty nervous for, and won't breathe easy until it's over.
Yeah. I actually predicted going into the season that you guys would be playing for the Big 12 title. I just, with the talent you guys had coming back, with Adrian Martinez coming in, with Deuce, with, Uzomah on the defensive side. I mean, I just knew that you guys were going to be a tough out this year. So I've predicted from the beginning that we weren't going to win this game. And I haven't changed that at all now because, we're not even as good as I thought we were going to be. So I just don't see how I could pick us to win. I do think it'll be close because, like I said, West Virginia does tend to play well at home. I think they'll keep it close. They'll be competitive. May even have a chance to tie or win, in the final minutes. But I think at the end of the day, you guys are probably going to win the turnover battle. You're probably going to get some big plays on us because that's kind of what we've been prone to do this season. So I think Kansas State wins the game. Your scores, I'm kind of right around where you are. I think it's probably going to be more in the, 31-28 range. Though I'm going to give us a little bit more points. But yeah, 31-28 Kansas State is kind of where I'm leaning right now.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, I put the 23 in there because I know you guys have a heck of a kicker and leg. Right.
Yeah.
And, K-State has been pretty good in the red zone for much of the year. So I'm just throwing a number out there, and I think it'll be, within a touchdown type game. I mean, I think it'll be a situation where I don't expect it to be a 14-21 point victory for K-State like they had against Baylor on the road, or against OSU. So there's a lot of unknowns for this game too. I mean, do they play both quarterbacks? How does K-State? K-State's going to have to be very careful. They can't run Will Howard at all, which they haven't really done much of, but they can't risk losing him because they don't really have anybody behind him that's proven yet. And, how does K-State adjust to the loss of Kobe Savage in the secondary? That's a question mark too. So there's some unknowns. It's going to be unpredictable, but that's what makes this thing fun / stressful.
Yeah, one good thing for West Virginia fans, I mean, we're a little bit excited to see Garrett Green play again because of his performance last week. Could he be that spark that gets this team to a bowl game all of a sudden? Maybe he was the one missing link that we needed. You don't know. And so the fan base, is going to be excited to see him play, how much he plays. And I'll be anxious to see, with all the rumors and stuff swirling around Coach Brown's job, how does he coach? How does he call the game? Is he more aggressive? Last week he called a fake punt. That's not something we normally do a lot. So, does he throw out? Does he do an onside kick at an unexpected time? Does he, do a fake punt or a fake field goal? That'll be interesting things to watch for to me in this game to see how West Virginia coaches this game. Are they going to go, balls to the wall and try to win this thing and just, do everything they can because they have nothing to lose at this point? It'll be interesting to see.
That's always a scary thing about these situations for me is when you play an opponent that doesn't have a lot to lose and can do some things like that. And, go for it on 4th downs, 4th and 1s, 4th and 2s, be aggressive. I could certainly see that with Neil Brown and just throw the book at Kansas State because it would certainly be a huge win for him.
Yeah, and it's funny, he took a lot of flack for not going for it on that 4th and short against Pitt the first game of the season. And I think he's went for it on 4th down 4 or 5 times a game ever since.
Yeah.
even in 4th and, longer situations.
Yeah.
It's kind of head scratching. But I think last week we were like 3 or 4 or 4 out of 5, something like that on 4th downs conversions. So
Yeah. Well,
we're pretty good on fourth down.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's often the smart thing to do is to go for it on fourth down. I mean, it's hard for a defense if you call plays like you have 4 plays to get 10 yards. It's hard for a defense to stop that. I mean,
it is.
So, and I mean, when you play Baylor, you can often see what they're trying to do. I mean, they run the ball on 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7 to try and get into a 4th and 2, and then they're going to run it again. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things for K-State that was big. Baylor went 0 for 3 on 4th downs against K-State, and they were top 5 in the country and number 2 in the country in 4th down conversions per game, and couldn't get one against K-State. So they're able to get off the field.
If you go for them, you better get them. I mean, that's the thing about those 4th downs, especially if you're around midfield.
Yep.
But we know we didn't even touch on special teams. But I mean, I know you guys are always good on special teams. West Virginia has surprisingly been. We had a few lapses at the beginning of the year, but they've kind of shored things up. Our special teams has actually been pretty good. Casey Legg's been solid. He hasn't missed a kick this year, made 2 game winners. Oliver Straw has gotten special teams coach player of the week now twice in the last couple of weeks. So, he's been pinning teams inside the 20 a lot. So, I like the matchup there. I think it'll be interesting to see the field position battle too in this game and who can win that.
Yeah, special teams have actually, it's been something dating back to Bill Snyder 1.0 back in the 90s that K-State has always been good at and could always rely on. And unfortunately, this year, special teams have not been very good for K-State. And so they had to change kickers, place kickers. They had a freshman, Chris Tennant, who was struggling midway through the year. Missed a couple of kicks inside around 44 and 39 against TCU, and they replaced him with Ty Zentner, who actually is a senior, and he's their starting punter, and he does all their kickoffs. So now he's also kicking all their extra points and field goal attempts. He's 5 for 5 on field goals, hasn't missed an extra point since he took over the job. But, I mean, I think his longest kick is around 33, 34 yards so far. Mm-hmm. He's a nice punter. K-State's been pretty good in the coverage units. It's the return game that has been disappointing for K-State fans. They have not been able to get explosives in the kick return game this year, which is something they usually can rely on. And Malik Knowles was first team all Big 12 kick returner coming into the year. And, he has not been able to have those big returns. In fact, against Texas, they actually wanted K-State to return the ball. They were angle kicking kickoffs around the 5-yard line to one side of the field. And K-State had 5 different possessions start around their 15-yard line or inside of it, because they could not get anything in the return game. So that is something to look out for. I mean, you keep, K-State fans, myself included, keep saying this is going to be the game they get that special teams play, that big special teams play, but it just has not happened this year much.
Yeah. Well, Cole, once again, let my listeners know where they can find you at, please.
Yeah, you bet. So we are, like I said, our podcast is called 3MAW. That's 3, the number 3, and then MAW. It's a play on words with EMAW, Every Man a Wildcat, and there's 3 of us that co-host the show. We produce around 3 shows a week. We're with the Kansas City Sports Network, which is a podcast platform based out of Kansas City that does all the local colleges, KU, K-State, Missouri, and then also a lot of Chiefs and Royal stuff on the professional side. So if you search KCSN, K-State Athletics, you'll probably be able to find us on all of your podcast platforms, Apple Pod, Google Podcast, Spotify. And then we also have our YouTube channel, KCSNU. It's a different YouTube channel that we moved to a couple of months ago, which is the university side. You can search Kansas City Sports Network KCSNU, and you'll be able to find us on YouTube as well.
Okay, and I'll put links to all that in the description of the video and the podcast as well. But I appreciate you coming on. And before I go, I want to get this what happened at the University of Virginia yesterday. We're filming this on a Tuesday. Yesterday there was that massive shooting at the University of Virginia. Thoughts and prayers going out to all those of the University of Virginia football program and the university as a whole, and the families and friends of all those that were involved in that. Just a terrible tragedy. Makes problems like your team losing too many football games really go into perspective,
Yep. Yeah, it absolutely does. Just a terrible, terrible thing to see happen, and really thinking about, that Virginia campus, the families, that football team. I can't imagine what they're going through right now, that staff trying to handle that locker room, and would not blame those guys if they didn't play again these last 2 games this year, because I just don't know how you come back from something like that on such short notice. That's such a difficult thing.
Yeah, Coach Brown, I didn't know this, but he actually lost 2 players while he was a coach at Troy. And he said it's definitely the hardest thing he's ever had to deal with. And losing them in the fashion that it happened at Virginia is just probably makes it even worse. So
yeah,
he definitely has he was sending his thoughts and prayers out today to start his press conference, and I meant to start the show with that, and I just forgot, but I didn't want to end without doing that. But Cole, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I know you're a busy guy. I appreciate you giving me an hour of your time. Hopefully, we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me come on, Kuz. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, and good luck to you guys. Not good luck this Saturday, but good luck the rest of the season.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and same to you guys.
And for all of you in Mountaineer Nation, Q Country Roads.